Hello and welcome to my Yu-Gi-Oh channel. Today we're looking at the new cards coming out of Yu-Gi-Oh! 7's episode 58. Daybreak Warrior is a level 6 Dark Attribute Warrior type effect monster with 1700 attack, and its defense points are unknown. The requirement, if you control a face-up monster, must be a level 7 Warrior type. You can activate this. And the effect is to special summon a monster that's a level 7 Warrior type from your hand. Essentially what you're able to do with this card's effect is you're able to boost your field presence with a reasonably high level monster. It is very specific, it does have to be in a warrior based deck, and you are going to have to be running multiple level 7 monsters to trigger this effect. It's very niche because it's specific to a certain level as well, which makes it a bit of a downside, along with the fact that this actually has to be tributed as a level 6 monster to even have this ability kick into effect. Fire Jester is a level 3 light attribute pyro type effect monster with 1000 attack and 500 defense. The requirement, if you control a face-up monster, it must be a level 5 or higher light attribute. You can activate this by sending the top card of your deck to the graveyard. And the effect, choose one face-up monster your opponent controls, level 8 or lower, it loses 500 attack and defense until the end of the turn. I consider this card to be quite decent. It does require you to have a strong light attribute monster on the field to activate the effect, and you do have to discard a card from the top of your deck, but neither condition is that difficult to achieve. Being able to suppress your opponent's attack position monsters by 500 attack and defense means you can get over most of everything, and at least puts you in a position where if your monsters are slightly weaker, you might just have enough strength on your side to be able to beat over those monsters. Imaginary Actor is a level 1 light attribute machine type normal monster with 500 attack and 500 defense. Again, being a normal monster means you don't have any effect to it. It's very weak and it's very underwhelming. Sword Dancer is a level 4 light attribute warrior type normal monster with 1400 attack and 500 defense. This is slightly more impressive just because 1500 tends to be a cap on level 4 monsters in terms of their attack, so 1400 is still reasonable at this point to run. Yugioh Megami is a level 6 light attribute fairy type normal monster with 1800 attack and 2000 defense. This is a card that's a reprint from the initial series of Yu-Gi-Oh! It was a very old card. It did for some reason have some association with Seto Kyber, but I don't think he actually physically used that within any of the games. I think it might have been partially in the anime, or maybe vice versa, it might have been purely within the games. I think there were a couple where this might have been introduced and not so much in the anime. I would also say that they've completely changed part of the artwork. The style of it is so different, considering that the original card came out of starter deck Kyber as a common. Yugioh Megami is a level 7 light attribute fairy type effect monster with 2400 attack and 2000 defense. The requirement, if Yugioh Megami is in your graveyard, you can activate this. The effect is to draw one card, then send the top card of your deck to the graveyard. If you sent a monster to the graveyard with this effect, you can choose 2 face-up monsters your opponent controls with the same type as that monster and destroy them. So this is meant to be like an evolved version of the original Megami. This is a level 7, so it is slightly more difficult to bring out. It does require 2 tributes as opposed to the 1, but this has an effect. The requirement just to have your original Megami in the graveyard is okay, it's not difficult to get there. It doesn't have to be summoned in any other way, it could just be foolish burialed to the graveyard, and there aren't any restrictions across that. The effect to draw one card is fine, but you do send the top card of your deck to the graveyard, so depending on what you have sent, it also means that it relates to its effect. You can choose 2 face-up monsters your opponent controls with the same type and destroy them. Problems I've got is, unless you're facing a mirror match or someone who's using the same typings of cards that you possess, in all likelihood you're not going to be able to trigger off this effect. It also means that you're going to have to be running almost pure of a certain type of monster, because if you're running multiple different types, and for example, you and your opponent are running fairy type monsters, but you randomly send the top card, which is a machine type for whatever reason, and your opponent only has fairy types within their deck and on their field, you don't get to trigger off this effect. There are massive downsides to this card. The only way I can guarantee this actually works is if you pair it with DNA surgery. That's a continuous trap card with the ability to make all monsters that are on the field happen to be of a specific type that you request them to be. So they could be fairy, they could be spellcaster, depending on what you want, any of the list of types that you desire. But bear in mind, once you activate its effect, all monsters on the field become that type. It's not that you can actually change it per turn. So there's that limitation as well. And of course, the final limitation on this card is it has to choose 2 face-up monsters. So if your opponent has face-down defense position monsters, then this effect won't work either. Imaginary Arc Tower is a field spell card with the requirement, if there is a normal monster, it has to be a light attribute with 500 defense in your graveyard, you can activate this card. The effect, while this card is face-up in a field zone, all face-up monsters that are non-light lose 300 attack, and face-up monsters level 9 that are light on the field cannot be destroyed by the effects of trap cards. I would say that this field spell is quite bizarre in that it has quite a few limitations and restrictions on it, and the monsters that are benefiting from this card are very specific. So we'll have a quick breakdown of what this actually does. The requirement, you need a normal monster that's a light attribute and it has to have exactly 500 defense points in your graveyard to be able to trigger this card anyway. So that's a massive limitation on the styles of decks you can run. The effect, whilst it's face up in the field zone, all face up non-light monsters lose 300 attack. That's fine. It's a good way of reducing some of your opponent's monsters, provided they're running non-light based decks, or at least if they've got very limited light monsters within their decks. And then your level 9 light attributes do have the protection from trap effects. That again is quite a decent effect, but I don't know of too many level 9 monsters. I think most of the monsters that are level 9, level 10 are maximum monsters as of yet, and we're yet to see anything beyond that. That's really that impressive. At the moment, even level 8 monsters aren't, impressive. So we'll have to wait on further support from that side. Imaginary Arc Turret is a normal trap card with the requirement, if you control a face-up light monster, you can activate this card when your opponent special summons a monster. The effect, during this turn, monsters with 2,500 or more attack cannot declare an attack this turn. Okay, so the idea of this is it's supposed to be like a threatening roar or something like a negate attack for high level and high attack monsters. It's fine because actually it's quite easy for you to trigger this effect. So long as you've got a light monster on your field and your opponent special summons a monster, you're able to just trigger this off during that summoning and then basically stop your opponent from attacking with high attack monsters. It's a decent enough effect because it's more likely to be happening when you're under threat and your opponent is trying to special summon into some of their strongest monsters. Doesn't always guarantee that's going to happen, but more likely than not, your opponent is going to focus on trying to bring out the strongest monster they can, and 2,500 isn't too big of a limitation. The other thing is you have to consider that your opponent might boost their monster's attack points to over 2,500, so there is the benefit from that point of view. The other downside I'd say is even if they do boost their effects, you have to trigger this when a monster has been special summoned, so they're already forewarned of what you're going to do. Essentially all they have to do is one, either, have their monsters get up to like 2,400 attack points so that they can still attack with those monsters and it's just under the threshold, or two, set themselves up with spell and trap support, whereas maybe they can't attack for the turn, but they know that if you try and attack into them the next turn, they are protected by their own effects. It says here that the kanji here means imaginary steel performance machine circular stage. I have no idea what that's supposed to refer to other than the name, but I much prefer Arc Turret as a name than the long-winded version that the Japanese have come up with. Fusion is a normal spell card with no requirements. The effect is to fusion summon by sending face-up monsters you control to the graveyard as materials. So this is meant to act a bit like polymerization. Key difference between this and polymerization is with polymerization you can fuse both from the hand and your field. This has to be specifically from your field. It doesn't necessarily become a problem because you can normal summon multiple times within your turn, so you're not limited as if this card had been within the original series of Yu-Gi-Oh! That would have been more of a nightmare. This suits fine for its purposes. And the final card is Metallion Asuristar. This is a cyborg type fusion monster with 2,800 attack points. The requirement, send the top card of your deck to the graveyard, and the effects are to destroy one set card your opponent controls, or cyborg type monsters you control gain attack equal to the total attack of all warrior type monsters your opponent controls. This is the big bit of news that I was mentioning in a previous video to do with our very first cyborg type monster. This is a first for both a fusion monster and this brand new cyborg type, much like, with Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5 that introduced pendulum monsters, that also introduced worm types, which were a variation on dragon types, because they didn't want dragon types to be overpowered. They did similar things with introducing the Cyberse types, and they've had examples. This is actually the first to happen within Yu-Gi-Oh! 7's, the anime. It's nice that it's on a brand new monster, and it's trying to actually start increasing the power levels of the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Rush Duels game, because prior to this it's been incredibly slow and it's very difficult to get through a game without having so many turns, and just it can be very boring, it can become very monotonous very quickly. This will hopefully speed up games slightly, not too much but a little bit. The requirement is fine, it's just send the top card of the deck to the graveyard, trigger off the effect is fine. You can either choose to destroy a set card, so that can be a spell or trap or a monster. If it's a set monster that in defense mode, that's fine. Or you can choose a cyborg type you control to gain the total attack of all the warrior type monsters your opponent controls. There are a couple of ways I can consider this effect to be very useful. It can affect itself, so consider its baseline attack stat is 2800. If your opponent has 3 warrior type monsters, combine those attacks into this monster and you could potentially OTK with this card. Even alternatively, if your opponent only has 1 warrior type monster, that's not necessarily a problem. Remember what I was saying about DNA Surgery as well being a continuous trap card. I'm not sure whether or not they've actually introduced that into Yu-Gi-Oh! Rush Duels as of yet, but as and when that happens, you're able to then call, for example, Warrior. Actually, scratch that, you can't call for Warrior, because the problem with that is this would also in turn become a Warrior type, and this effect can actually only work on cyborg type monsters. You would need to have something similar to DNA Surgery, but which either affected your opponent's monsters so that it doesn't affect yours, or you need to have other cards which can manipulate your opponent's typings to make sure that they stay as warrior and your monsters stay as cyborg. It's very limited for the time being, but I'm sure we will receive specific support for this, considering this is a brand new mechanic, brand new type to be introduced within Yu-Gi-Oh! Rush Duels. What do you guys think of these cards? Personally, I do love this new fusion. I do find it a bit creepy, but I think that's the whole aesthetic and the reason for it. If you like the cards, let me know which is your favourite and which one you don't like. Leave those in the comments down below. Like the video if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe for more daily Yu-Gi-Oh! Content.